Lena Hawthorne woke up in freezing darkness, her breath a cloud of vapor, hands zip-tied behind her back. Outside, wind howled through pine trees she didn't recognize. The door swung open, not her father's men, not rescue, just a man holding an axe, his face weathered and unreadable. "You're on your own now," he said. No explanation, no mercy. In that moment, the billionaire heiress realized her empire meant nothing here. Survival wasn't negotiable. It was earned. If you want to see how a woman raised in penthouses learns to survive where money can't save her, stay with me until the end. And hit like and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The helicopter blades stopped turning. Lena Hawthorne sat in the back seat, wrists bound with zip ties, still wearing the Valentino blazer she'd had on in the boardroom 6 hours ago. Her father's head of security, a man named Garrett, with the dead eyes of someone who'd done this before, opened the door and dragged her out into snow so cold it felt like broken glass against her skin. "Where the hell are we?" she demanded, voice sharp despite the fear climbing her spine. Garrett didn't answer. He hauled her forward through knee-deep snow toward a structure half buried in shadow. A cabin, or what was left of one. Scaffolding leaned against the north wall. Tarp snapped in the wind. The smell of sawdust and diesel exhaust hung in the frozen air. A man stepped out of the cabin, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 32, wearing a canvas jacket and boots caked in mud and ice. His face was hard, carved by wind and work, and when his eyes landed on Lena, there was no surprise, just cold assessment. "Ethan Cole?" Garrett said. The man nodded. "She's your problem now, yeet." Garrett cut the zip ties with a utility knife, dropped Lena's leather weekend bag in the snow, and walked back to the helicopter without another word. The rotors spun up. Lena turned, shouting something lost in the noise, and then the machine lifted into the gray sky and vanished over the ridge. Silence rushed in like water filling a hole. Lena stood there, breath heaving, hands numb. She turned slowly to face the man called Ethan Cole. He hadn't moved, just stood there, rag still in his hand, watching her like she was a stray dog someone had dumped at his door. "You're going to take me back down," she said. Not a question, a command. Ethan tilted his head slightly. "No." "Excuse me? No vehicle, no phone signal. Storm's coming in tonight. You're stuck." Lena's jaw tightened. "Do you know who I am?" "Yeah, Richard Hawthorne's daughter, CEO of something, billion-dollar trust fund." He folded the rag and shoved it in his back pocket. "Doesn't mean a damn thing up here." She took a step forward, boots slipping in the snow. "My father paid you. He paid me to finish this cabin, that's all. You want shelter, you follow the rules. You want food, you work. You don't like it, there's the woods." He gestured toward the dark wall of pines stretching in every direction. "Good luck." Lena stared at him, anger vibrating through her chest. This was a mistake, a cruel joke. Her father was punishing her for the merger vote, for pushing back, for refusing to rubber stamp his latest scheme. But this, abandoning her on a frozen mountain with some redneck contractor, this was insane. "I'm calling someone," she said, pulling her phone from her coat pocket. Ethan didn't react, just turned and walked back toward the cabin. Lena looked at the screen. No service, not even a single bar. She tried again, moving toward higher ground, arm raised like an idiot. Nothing. The cold was already biting through her clothes, her fingers going stiff. Ethan's voice came from the doorway. "You planning to freeze out there, or you coming in?" She wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to scream. Instead, she grabbed her bag and followed him inside, because the wind was starting to cut through her blazer like a blade. The interior of the cabin was raw and unfinished, exposed beams overhead, plywood subfloor scattered with tools. A wood stove in the corner, fire crackling behind the grate. The walls were framed but not insulated. Plastic sheeting covered gaps where windows should be. It smelled like fresh-cut lumber and something metallic. Rust, maybe, or blood from a skinned knuckle. Ethan was already back at a workbench, marking measurements on a length of 2x6. He didn't look up. Lena dropped her bag on the floor. "How long?" "How long what?" "Until I can leave." He set down his pencil and finally met her eyes. "Depends." "On what?" "Weather, roads, whether you survive that long. She laughed, sharp and bitter. You think this scares me? I think you're cold, tired, and out of your depth. He picked up a handsaw. But that's your problem, not mine. Lena's hands curled into fists. She wanted to hit him, wanted to break something. Instead, she turned and walked to the stove, holding her hands over the heat. Her fingers were white at the tips, starting to ache as circulation returned. There's a cot in the back corner, Ethan said without looking up. Sleeping bags on it. Outhouse is 50 feet west. Water comes from the creek, but the pump's broken, so if you're thirsty, you haul it yourself. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? He didn't. His face was stone. Lena turned away, jaw aching from how hard she was clenching it. She walked to the cot, a flimsy, fold-up frame with a stained sleeping bag that smelled like mildew, and sat down. The metal groaned under her weight. She stared at the wall, at the gaps in the plastic sheeting where wind pushed through in cold whispers, and realized with a sick clarity that no one was coming for her. Her father had done this. Richard Hawthorne, the man who'd built an empire on ruthless efficiency, had decided his daughter needed a lesson. And he'd chosen this frozen nowhere, this silent stranger, to deliver it. The fire popped. Ethan kept working. Lena closed her eyes and tried not to cry. So she woke to the sound of hammering. It was still dark outside. The stove had burned low. Lena sat up, disoriented, her body stiff and aching from sleeping in her clothes. Ethan was at the workbench, driving nails into a frame with mechanical precision. He'd lit a battery-powered lantern. His breath came in steady clouds. "What time is it?" she asked, voice hoarse. 4:30. "In the morning." He didn't answer, just kept hammering. Lena pulled the sleeping bag tighter around her shoulders. "Do you ever stop?" "When the job's done." "And when's that?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. She laughed, exhausted. "You think I'm staying here for a month?" Ethan set down the hammer and turned to face her. "You're staying until the road's clear and someone comes to get you. That's reality. You can spend that time complaining, or you can make yourself useful." "Useful," she repeated, tasting the word like poison. "Yeah, there's work. If you want to eat, you work." Lena stood, letting the sleeping bag fall. "I didn't come here to be your laborer. You didn't come here at all. You got dumped. Big difference." The truth of it hit her like a slap. She wanted to argue, to assert some kind of control, but the cabin was freezing and her stomach was empty, and Ethan Cole was already turning back to his work, dismissing her as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. "What kind of work?" she said quietly. He glanced over his shoulder. "You serious? Do I have a choice? No? Then I'm serious." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the door. "Get dressed. We start in 20 minutes." The cold outside was a living thing. Lena stepped into it wearing the only warm clothes she'd packed, a cashmere sweater, designer jeans, leather boots with heels meant for marble floors, not snow. Ethan was already outside, loading tools into a rusted wheelbarrow. He looked at her outfit and shook his head. "You're gonna freeze. I don't have anything else." He disappeared into a shed and came back with a canvas coat, wool socks, and a pair of work boots that were 2 sizes too big. "Put these on." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell him she didn't need his charity, but her fingers were already going numb, so she took the coat and pulled it on. It smelled like diesel and sweat and something faintly animal. The boots flopped when she walked. "Better," Ethan said. "Come on." "Moshi meet ishiit." He led her down a slope toward a narrow creek, half frozen over. The water moved sluggishly beneath a skin of ice. Next to it stood a rusted pump housing, the kind you'd see in old photographs. Manual, mechanical, older than both of them combined. "This is the water source," Ethan said. "Pump seized, needs to be pulled apart, cleaned, and reassembled. You're going to help." Lena stared at the contraption. "I don't know how to fix a pump." "Then you're going to learn." He knelt in the snow and started unbolting the housing. Lena stood there, useless, until he glanced up. "You going to watch, or you going to hand me that wrench?" She grabbed the wrench from the toolbox and passed it to him. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, from anger, from humiliation, from the sheer absurdity of being here. kneeling in the snow beside a man who didn't give a damn about her name or her money or the fact that 48 hours ago she'd been signing off on acquisitions worth more than most people made in a lifetime. "Turn the valve," Ethan said. "Which one?" "The red one, counterclockwise." She gripped the valve and pulled. It didn't move. She pulled harder, putting her weight into it, and the metal finally gave with a screech that made her teeth ache. Water sputtered out, brown and freezing, splashing onto her jeans. "Jesus!" "Keep it open," Ethan said. "Let it drain." "But..." She held the valve, icy water soaking through the knees of her jeans, and watched Ethan work. His hands moved with absolute certainty, pulling bolts, lifting the housing, exposing the guts of the pump. Rusted gears, a cracked gasket, sediment packed into every crevice. "This whole thing's shot," he muttered. "Can it be fixed?" "Oh, everything can be fixed if you're willing to do the work." He glanced at her, and for the first time there was something in his eyes that wasn't cold, just exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who'd been fixing broken things for a long time. "Hold this," he said, handing her a gear slick with grease. She took it, grimacing. Her hands were already filthy. The cold had turned her fingers stiff and clumsy. They worked in silence for over an hour. Ethan showed her how to clean the gears with a wire brush, how to scrape sediment from the housing, how to fit the gasket without tearing it. Lena's back ached. Her knees were numb. Her hands were covered in cuts she hadn't noticed getting. But the pump went back together. When Ethan finally stood and tested it, water flowed clear and cold into the bucket. He nodded, satisfied, and picked up the toolbox. "Good," he said. That was it. No praise, no acknowledgement beyond that single word. But as Lena stood there, hands shaking, jeans soaked, face windburned and raw, she felt something shift inside her. Not pride, not accomplishment, just the faint, stubborn realization that she'd done something she didn't think she could do. Ethan was already walking back toward the cabin. "Come on," he called over his shoulder. "Breakfast, then the roof." Lena followed, boots crunching in the snow. Breakfast was instant oatmeal and black coffee so strong it tasted like tar. They ate in silence at the workbench, Ethan standing, Lena perched on a sawhorse because there were no chairs. The oatmeal was bland and gummy, but she ate every bite because her stomach was hollow and screaming. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. Ethan glanced at her. "I'm working." "No, I mean here, alone, on a mountain in the middle of nowhere." He didn't answer right away, just took another sip of coffee, staring out through the plastic sheeting at the gray sky. "I needed the work," he said. "Pays well, quiet." "You have family?" His jaw tightened. "Son." Lena waited, but he didn't offer more. She wanted to press, to understand what kind of man walked away from his kid to build a cabin in the wilderness. But something in his face told her to leave it alone. "What about you?" Ethan said. "What about me? Why'd your father dump you here?" Lena laughed bitterly. "Because I voted against him." "On what?" "A merger. Acquisition of a competitor. The numbers didn't add up, but he pushed it through anyway. I was the only board member who said no." She set down her coffee, hands still shaking. "He doesn't forgive that kind of thing." Ethan nodded slowly. "So this is punishment? This is a lesson? In what?" "Obedience." Ethan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe? Or pity? Lena hated both. "You gonna let him teach it to you?" he asked. "What choice do I have?" "You always have a choice." She wanted to believe that. Wanted to think she had any power in this situation. But sitting there in borrowed boots, hands cut and filthy, she couldn't see a way out that didn't involve crawling back to her father and begging forgiveness. Ethan stood and grabbed his coat. "Roof's not gonna fix itself. You coming?" Lena looked at him. This stranger who didn't care about her name or her money, who'd given her a coat and a wrench and a cup of terrible coffee, who was offering her the only thing she had left, work. "Yeah," she said, "I'm coming." The roof was a nightmare. Ethan had her hauling bundles of shingles up a ladder while he worked above, nailing them into place. Each bundle weighed 40 pounds. Lena's arms burned after the third trip. By the 10th, she was shaking so hard she nearly dropped one. "Careful," Ethan called down. "You drop that, it's coming out of your pay." "I'm not getting paid." "Exactly." She wanted to scream at him, wanted to throw the shingles in the snow and walk away. But there was nowhere to walk to. Just trees and cold and the certainty that if she quit now, she'd prove her father right, that she was soft, that she couldn't survive without her money, that she was nothing. So she kept climbing. By midday, her hands were blistered, her shoulders were on fire. Ethan had her hold sections of plywood while he secured them, the wind whipping so hard she could barely keep her grip. Once, her foot slipped on the icy ladder and she hung there, fingers locked around the rungs, heart hammering. Ethan's hand appeared above her, gripping her wrist. "I got you. Climb." Oh, she climbed. When they finally stopped for lunch, Lena collapsed against the cabin wall, breathing hard. Ethan handed her a protein bar and a bottle of water. She ate without tasting it. "You did good," he said. She looked up, surprised. He was already walking away, but the words stayed with her. "You did good. It wasn't much, but it was something." That night, after another meal of canned soup and stale bread, Lena lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her hands were wrapped in bandages Ethan had pulled from a first aid kit without comment. Across the cabin, Ethan sat by the stove, carving something from a piece of scrap wood. His knife moved in steady, precise strokes. The firelight turned his face into planes of shadow. "What are you making?" Lena asked. "Toy truck. For my son." "How old is he?" "4. "Does he know you're here?" Ethan's hands stopped. He looked at the half-carved truck, then set it down. "He knows I'm working. That's all he needs to know." You miss him." It wasn't a question. Ethan's jaw worked, and for a moment Lena thought he wouldn't answer. "Every day," he said finally. "But this job pays for his future. Private school, stable home, things I didn't have growing up. And when it's done, I go back, finish what I started." Lena watched him pick up the truck again, resuming his work. She thought about her own father, about the things he'd built, the empire he'd carved from nothing, the ruthless efficiency with which he'd sacrificed everything, including her, to maintain it. "Do you think he'll understand?" she asked quietly. "When he's older?" Ethan didn't look up. "I hope so. But if he doesn't, that's on me." The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the plastic sheeting. Lena closed her eyes, and for the first time since the helicopter had landed, she didn't cry. She just listened to the sound of Ethan's knife, carving something out of nothing, one stroke at a time. The days blurred together. Lena woke before dawn, worked until her hands bled, ate tasteless meals, and collapsed into sleep so deep she didn't dream. Ethan pushed her hard, hauling materials, mixing concrete, sanding beams until her arms felt like they'd fall off. He didn't coddle her, didn't slow down. If she fell behind, he kept working, and she had to catch up or be left behind. But something was changing. Her hands stopped blistering. Her muscles stopped screaming. She learned to swing a hammer without smashing her thumb, to measure twice and cut once, to read the weather in the shape of the clouds. She stopped asking when she could leave and started asking what needed to be done next. Ethan noticed. He didn't say anything, but she saw it in the way he handed her tools without explaining, the way he stepped back and let her finish tasks alone, the way he poured her coffee in the mornings without being asked. They were becoming something. Not friends, not quite, but partners in survival. One afternoon, while they were reinforcing the foundation, Lena looked up and caught Ethan watching her. He didn't look away. "What?" she asked. "You're getting better," he said. She asked. "You're at what?" "At this." She wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt. "You sound surprised." "I am." "Why?" "Because most people quit." Lena set down her shovel and met his eyes. "I'm not most people." Ethan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "No, you're not." And for the first time since the helicopter had vanished over the ridge, Lena felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The second week began with ice. Lena woke to the sound of something cracking, sharp, violent, like a gunshot. She bolted upright on the cot, heart hammering, and saw Ethan already at the window, peeling back the plastic sheeting to look outside. "What was that?" she asked. "Branch. Heavy snow." He let the plastic fall back into place. "Storm's moving in faster than I thought." She could hear it now, the wind building, a low howl that made the cabin walls shudder. Ethan was already pulling on his boots, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from years of waking up to emergencies. "Get dressed," he said. "We need to secure the tarps before it hits." Lena didn't argue. She'd learned that much. When Ethan gave an order, you followed it, because he didn't waste words on things that didn't matter. She yanked on the oversized boots, grabbed the canvas coat, and followed him outside into a world turned gray and hostile. The temperature had dropped overnight. The air tasted metallic, and the snow that had seemed manageable yesterday now reached past her knees in places. Ethan was already at the north wall, checking the ropes that held the tarps against the unfinished sections of the cabin. "Grab that corner!" he shouted over the wind. Lena waded through the drifts and caught the edge of the tarp before it tore loose. The canvas snapped in her hands like a living thing trying to escape. Her fingers were already numb. "Tie it off," Ethan called. "Use the cleat." She fumbled with the rope, fingers clumsy inside the work gloves he'd given her. The knot she'd practiced a dozen times suddenly felt impossible. The wind ripped at the tarp, nearly yanking her off her feet. "I can't!" Ethan was there, his hands covering hers, guiding the rope through the cleat and pulling it tight. He didn't say anything, just stepped back and moved to the next tie-down. They worked for an hour, maybe more, fighting the wind and the cold and the snow that was starting to fall in thick, wet clumps. By the time they finished, Lena's face was raw and her lungs burned from breathing frozen air. Ethan checked every rope twice, then nodded toward the cabin. "Inside, now." She didn't need to be told twice. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a wall. Lena stripped off the wet coat and stood by the stove, shaking. Ethan was already stoking the fire, adding split logs with the kind of care that suggested he knew exactly how long they needed to last. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough. We've got maybe 6 hours before the worst of it hits." "And then?" "Then we stay inside and wait it out." Lena watched him work, watched the way he moved, deliberate, calm, like he'd done this 100 times before. She wanted to ask him where he'd learned to survive like this, what kind of life had taught him to read weather and tie knots and keep a fire burning through the night, but the look on his face told her this wasn't the time. "What do you need me to do?" she said instead. Ethan glanced at her and something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but close. "Help me bring in more firewood. Everything that's stacked outside needs to come in before the snow buries it." They spent the next 2 hours hauling wood. Lena's arms screamed with every load, but she kept moving, kept stacking the split logs against the far wall until they had a pile that reached her shoulder. Ethan didn't stop, didn't slow down. He just kept working, and she kept pace, because the alternative was admitting she couldn't. When they finally finished, Ethan stood back and surveyed the cabin. The firewood, the water containers they'd filled from the pump, the canned food lined up on the makeshift shelf. His jaw was tight. "Something wrong?" Lena asked. "We're short on food." "How short?" 3 days, maybe 4 if we stretch it." He ran a hand through his hair, the first sign of frustration she'd seen from him. "I was supposed to get a supply drop yesterday. Weather scrubbed it." Bas. Lena's stomach tightened. What happens if the storm lasts longer than that? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. Outside, the wind was already picking up, rattling the plastic sheeting and moaning through the gaps in the walls. The sky had turned the color of old bruises, heavy and dark, and promising nothing good. "Get some rest," Ethan said.
"While you can." Boy, already you borrow what?
Lena looked at the cot, then at the pile of firewood, then at Ethan, who was already pulling out tools to reinforce the doorframe. Rest felt impossible, but she was learning to trust him. So she lay down and closed her eyes and listened to the sound of his hammer driving nails into wood. She didn't sleep, but she tried. The storm hit just after dark. Lena had thought she understood cold, understood wind, understood what it meant to be trapped. She'd been wrong. This was something else, something primal and relentless. The wind didn't howl. It screamed. It threw itself against the cabin with a violence that made the walls groan and the roof timbers creak. Snow didn't fall. It drove sideways, piling against the door until Ethan had to brace it with a 2x4 to keep it from blowing in. The temperature inside the cabin dropped. Lena could see her breath even with the fire roaring. She huddled near the stove, wrapped in every blanket they had, and watched Ethan move through the space, checking seals, adjusting the stove damper, securing anything that might shift or fall. "How long?" she asked. "Could be 12 hours. Could be 3 days." 3 days? I've seen worse. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think he had this under control. But the way he kept checking the roof, the way his eyes tracked every new sound, told her he was worried. The lights flickered. The single battery-powered lantern they'd been using dimmed, then steadied. Ethan grabbed a headlamp and strapped it on. "We need to ration the batteries," he said. "Lantern stays off unless we need it." Lena nodded. The darkness pressed in, broken only by the glow of the fire and the thin beam of Ethan's headlamp. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm. Lena's mind drifted to her father, to the boardroom where this had all started, to the look on his face when she'd cast her vote against him. She wondered if he knew where she was right now, wondered if he cared. "Tell me about your son," she said suddenly. Ethan looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I don't want to think about freezing to death." He huffed, not quite a laugh, but close. He stared at the fire, and for a moment Lena thought he wouldn't answer. "His name's Sam," Ethan said finally. 4 years old, smart as hell, loves trucks, hates broccoli, asks about 1,000,000 questions a day. "Where is he now?" "With his grandmother, my ex's mother." His voice tightened. "His mom died 2 years ago, car accident." Lena's chest constricted. "I'm sorry." Yeah, me too." Ethan picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. "She was a good person, better than I deserved. When she died, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Still don't most days. But you're here, working for him. That's all I know how to do, work, fix things. I can't fix what happened to his mom, but I can make sure he's got a roof over his head and food on the table and a chance at something better than I had." Bashishamgrim, Ishis. Lena studied him in the firelight. This man who'd seemed so cold, so unreadable, now sitting with his grief laid bare like an open wound. She thought about her own father, about the distance between them, about the way Richard Hawthorne had built an empire but couldn't build a relationship with his own daughter. "He's lucky," she said quietly, "to have you." Ethan's jaw worked. "I don't know about that." "I do." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or understanding. Two people who'd lost things they couldn't get back, trying to build something from the wreckage. The wind hit the cabin so hard the walls shook. A loud crack echoed from somewhere above. Ethan was on his feet instantly, headlamp swinging toward the ceiling. "Stay here," he said. "What was that?" "I don't know." He grabbed his coat and disappeared up the ladder to the loft space where the roof beams joined. Lena heard his boots on the plywood, heard him moving things, cursing under his breath. When he came back down, his face was grim. "One of the support beams cracked. Snow load's too heavy." "Can you fix it?" "Not in this storm. Best I can do is brace it and hope it holds." Lena watched him pull lumber from the stack, watched him measure and cut and hammer in the dim light of his headlamp. She wanted to help, but there was nothing she could do except stay out of his way. So she fed the fire, kept the heat going, and tried not to think about what would happen if the roof came down. An hour later, Ethan climbed down from the loft, breathing hard. "That's all I can do. If it holds, we're fine. If it doesn't..." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. They sat by the fire again, closer now, sharing the heat. Lena's hands were shaking, not from cold, from fear, from the sheer weight of everything pressing down on them, the storm, the isolation, the fragile structure keeping them alive. "You scared?" Ethan asked. "Yeah." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." "You scared?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at the fire, jaw tight. Every damn day. The honesty of it hit her harder than she expected. She'd thought he was fearless, thought nothing touched him. but he was just better at carrying it.
Thank you, she said. For what?
For not letting me quit. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time he smiled. Not much, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, but it was real. You didn't need me for that, he said. You just needed to remember you could. See it. The storm didn't break. It got worse. By midnight, the wind was so loud it drowned out thought. The cabin shook with every gust. Snow piled against the walls, burying the windows, turning the world outside into a solid mass of white. The fire burned low despite Ethan's efforts to keep it fed. They were running through wood faster than he'd planned. Lena pulled the blankets tighter and tried to sleep, but every creak, every groan of the structure sent adrenaline spiking through her veins. Beside her, Ethan sat awake, headlamp off now to save the battery, just the faint glow of the coals illuminating his face. You should rest, she said. Can't. Need to monitor the beam. When's the last time you slept? Couple days ago. Ethan? I'm fine. He wasn't fine. She could see it in the tightness of his shoulders, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching. He was running on fumes, held together by sheer will and the responsibility he carried for both of them. Let me take a shift, Lena said. I'll watch. You sleep. You don't know what to look for. Then tell me. He turned to look at her, and she met his eyes, refusing to back down. Finally, he sighed. If you hear cracking from the roof, wake me. If the fire goes out, wake me. If anything feels wrong, wake me. Got it. Ethan stretched out on the floor near the stove, using his coat as a pillow. Within minutes, his breathing evened out. Lena watched him sleep. This man who'd somehow become the only solid thing in her collapsing world, and she made herself a promise. She wouldn't let him down. The hours crawled past. Lena fed the fire, carefully adding just enough wood to keep it alive without burning through their supply. She listened to the storm, listened to the cabin, listened to the rhythm of Ethan's breathing. Once, she thought she heard something crack overhead, and she froze, heart pounding, but the sound didn't repeat. At some point, exhaustion dragged her under. She didn't mean to sleep. One moment she was watching the fire, and the next she was jerking awake to the sound of Ethan's voice. Lena, get up. She blinked, disoriented. The cabin was dark except for the dying coals. Ethan was on his feet, headlamp blazing, staring at the ceiling. What's wrong? The beam's failing, yet. She looked up. Even in the dim light, she could see it. The crack in the support beam had widened, splintering down the grain. The wood groaned under the weight of the snow piled on the roof. What do we do? Ethan was already moving, grabbing tools, dragging over a hydraulic jack. I'm going to try to take the pressure off. If this doesn't work, we need to get out. Out where? The storm's still going. Truck. It's got heat. We can wait it out there. He positioned the jack under the beam and started cranking. The metal screeched. The beam shifted, groaning. For a moment, Lena thought it would hold. Then the crack spread, racing along the wood with a sound like tearing paper, and the whole section sagged. Move, Ethan shouted. Lena grabbed her coat and the emergency pack Ethan had prepared. He was right behind her, shoving the door open against the wall of snow that had piled against it. They stumbled out into the storm, into wind so strong it nearly knocked her down. The cold was instant, vicious, cutting through her clothes like knives. Ethan gripped her arm, pulling her toward the shape of the truck barely visible through the whiteout. He yanked open the door and shoved her inside, then climbed in after her, slamming the door against the wind. The silence inside the cab was sudden and disorienting. Lena's ears rang, her lungs burned. Ethan turned the key, and the engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Warm air blasted from the vents. Is it going to collapse? Lena asked, staring back at the cabin through the snow-covered windshield. Maybe. I don't know. Ethan's voice was tight. Either way, we can't go back in until the storm passes. Lena looked around the truck cab, cramped, old, smelling like oil and rust. Their breath fogged the windows. The heater wheezed, but worked. How long can we stay here? As long as we have gas, maybe 8 hours. And then? Then we hope the storm's over. Oh. Lena pulled her knees to her chest, trying to conserve heat. Ethan did the same, leaning against the driver's side door. The storm raged around them, rocking the truck, burying it in snow. Inside, The heater ticked and hummed, fighting a losing battle against the cold pressing in from all sides. "I'm sorry," Ethan said suddenly. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. You didn't ask to be here. Didn't ask for any of this." Lena looked at him, really looked at him. At the exhaustion etched into his face, the fear he was trying to hide, the weight of responsibility he carried like a second skin. "You didn't drag me anywhere," she said. "My father dumped me here. You just kept me alive. Barely. That's more than I would have managed on my own." He didn't respond, just stared out the window at the wall of white. Lena wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the guilt she could see eating at him, but she didn't know what. So she reached out and took his hand. He looked down, surprised. His fingers were rough, calloused, trembling slightly from cold or exhaustion or both. But he didn't pull away. He just held on, and they sat there in the rattling truck cab, two people who'd started as strangers and somewhere along the way had become something else. "We're going to be okay," Lena said. She didn't know if she believed it, but she said it anyway, because he needed to hear it. Ethan's grip tightened. "Yeah, we are. War shit." The heater kept running. The storm kept howling, and they waited. Waltz. Dawn came slowly, gray and reluctant. Lena woke to silence. Not the silence of peace, but the heavy, muffled quiet that comes after violence. The storm had stopped. The truck engine was off. Beside her, Ethan was already awake, staring out the windshield at the world the storm had left behind. Snow covered everything. The cabin was buried up to the windows on one side. The trees sagged under the weight. Branches snapped and scattered like broken bones. The sky was still dark, still threatening, but the wind had died. "We made it," Lena said. "Yeah." Ethan's voice was flat. "Let's see what's left. Gon." They climbed out of the truck, wading through snow that reached Lena's thighs. The cold bit immediately, but it felt different now, less vicious, more survivable. Ethan pushed toward the cabin door, digging with his hands to clear enough snow to get it open. Inside, the damage was worse than Lena had feared. The cracked beam had given way completely, bringing down a section of the roof. Snow had poured through the gap, covering half the floor. The stove was buried. Their supplies, what little they had, were scattered and soaked. Ethan stood in the doorway, staring at the wreckage. His face was unreadable. "Can it be fixed?" Lena asked. "I don't know." She had never heard him say that before. It scared her more than the storm had. They spent the morning digging out what they could salvage. Most of the food was ruined. The sleeping bags were soaked. The tools were scattered under a foot of snow. Ethan worked in silence, his movements mechanical, and Lena could see him calculating, running through options, trying to figure out if they could survive this. By noon, they had a small pile of salvaged supplies. A few cans of food, some dry matches, a tarp, and the emergency pack from the truck. It wasn't enough, not even close. Ethan sat on a snow-covered log, head in his hands. Lena had never seen him like this. Defeated, lost. She wanted to fix it, wanted to say something that would bring back the man who'd taught her to tie knots and swing a hammer, but she didn't know how. So she did the only thing she could think of. She picked up a shovel and started clearing snow from the collapsed section of the roof. Ethan looked up. "What are you doing?" "Working." "Lena, you told me everything can be fixed if you're willing to do the work, so let's do the work." He stared at her, and something shifted in his face. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude, or something too complicated to name. Then he stood, grabbed a shovel, and joined her. They worked side by side, clearing snow, pulling down the damaged section of the roof, salvaging beams that could be reused. It was brutal, exhausting labor, made worse by the cold and the hunger gnawing at Lena's stomach. But she didn't stop. Neither did Ethan. By the time the sun started to set, what little sun made it through the clouds, they'd cleared the debris and stabilized what was left of the structure. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't whole, but it was standing. Ethan stepped back, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "We need more supplies, food, batteries, materials to rebuild the roof." "How do we get them?" "I don't know. The roads are buried, radio's not working, we're cut off." Lena's mind raced. She thought about the satellite phone her father's security team had used, about the helicopter that had dropped her here, about the infrastructure of wealth and power she'd taken for granted her entire life. And then she thought about the past 2 weeks, about everything Ethan had taught her, about the way survival stripped away everything that didn't matter. "We make do," she said, "with what we have." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since the storm hit, he smiled. "Yeah, we do." They rebuilt the fire using wood they'd pulled from the wreckage, cooked the last can of soup over the flames, and shared it in silence. It wasn't enough to fill their stomachs, but it was warm, and it was something. That night, they slept in the truck again, engine running just enough to keep the frost at bay. Lena lay curled on the passenger seat. Ethan stretched across the driver's side, and neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The storm had changed something between them, had burned away the last of the distance and left something raw and real in its place. Lena stared out the window at the stars beginning to emerge from the clouds, and she realized with a shock that she didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not until they'd finished what they'd started. Beside her, Ethan's breathing evened out. She turned her head and watched him sleep. This man who'd kept her alive, who'd taught her what it meant to endure, and she made herself another promise. When they got off this mountain, she wouldn't go back to being the person she'd been before. That person was gone. And Lena wasn't sure she wanted her back. The morning after the storm broke clear and brittle, the kind of cold that made breathing feel dangerous. Lena woke in the truck cab with frost coating the inside of the windows, and her muscles screaming from 3 weeks of labor her body had never been designed for. Ethan was already outside, standing in waist-deep snow, staring at the cabin like he was trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. She pushed open the door and climbed out, her boots punching through the frozen crust. "How bad?" "Bad." He didn't look at her. "We've got maybe 2 days of food left. Less if we're honest about portions. The roof's compromised, the stove's damaged, and even if I fix both, we're out of firewood by tomorrow night." "So what do we do?" Ethan turned then, and the look on his face was something she'd never seen before. Not fear, not defeat, but something close to both. "We ration what we have and hope someone realizes we're in trouble. And if they don't?" He didn't answer, just grabbed a shovel and started clearing the path to the cabin door. Lena followed him inside. The damage looked worse in daylight. The collapsed section of roof had let in so much snow that half the interior was buried. Water dripped from the exposed beams. The makeshift shelves had collapsed, scattering cans and tools across the floor. The wood stove stood at an angle, one leg bent from the impact of falling debris. Ethan knelt beside it, running his hands over the metal. "Flue's cracked. We fire this up, we'll fill the place with smoke. Can you fix it?" "Maybe. If I had the right tools." He stood, brushing snow from his knees. "But I don't, so we don't." Lena felt something cold settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. No heat meant no cooking, no way to dry their clothes, no defense against the nights when the temperature dropped so low that even the truck's heater couldn't keep up. "Then we need to get out," she said. "Roads are impassable. Snow's too deep. Even if we tried to hike down, we wouldn't make it a mile in these conditions. So we just wait? Hope someone comes." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You got a better idea?" She didn't. That was the worst part. For the first time since the helicopter had dumped her here, Lena felt the full weight of how powerless they were. No phone, no heat, no cavalry coming over the ridge. Just 2 people in a broken cabin and the cold pressing in from all sides. "We keep working," Ethan said quietly. "It's all we can do." So they did. They spent the day salvaging what they could. Ethan rigged a tarp over the collapsed section of roof, lashing it down with rope that barely held against the wind that had picked up again. Lena hauled the soaked supplies outside, spreading them across the snow to freeze dry in the thin sunlight. It was brutal, mindless work, and she was grateful for it because it kept her from thinking about how little food was left, how much colder it was going to get, how fragile their survival had become. By late afternoon, they'd cleared enough space inside to set up a makeshift shelter in the corner farthest from the damaged roof. Ethan strung another tarp to create a windbreak, then laid out the sleeping bags, still damp, but better than nothing. "We sleep here tonight," he said. "Share body heat. It's the only way we're going to make it through, Sim." Lena nodded. A week ago, the idea would have felt invasive, inappropriate. Now it just felt necessary. They were past the point where pride or propriety mattered. Dinner was half a can of beans split between them. Ethan ate his portion slowly, methodically, like he was trying to trick his body into thinking it was more. Lena did the same. The hunger was constant now, a gnawing ache that never quite went away. "Tell me about the merger," Ethan said suddenly. She looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I want to know what was worth getting dumped on a mountain for." Lena set down her empty can. The memory felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. "My father wanted to acquire a competitor, Stellar Development. On paper, it looked good. Assets, contracts, market share. But I went through the financials myself, found irregularities. Money moving through shell companies, projects that didn't exist. It was a shell game, and my father knew it.
Tosi is Sam.
So why push it through, Sam? Because once the acquisition closed, he could bury the fraud, write it off as legacy issues, and walk away clean. The board would rubber stamp it because they always do. Except I didn't. Ethan leaned back against the tarp. "You voted no." "I voted no, in front of everyone, called him out on it." She laughed bitterly. He smiled, thanked me for my input. 2 hours later, I was in a helicopter heading here. He's punishing you for having a conscience. He's teaching me that nothing matters except winning. That's how he built Hawthorne Industries. Ruthless efficiency. No second guessing. No room for doubt. And you think he's right? Lena looked at Ethan, at this man who'd worked himself half to death to build something honest for his son, who'd chosen the hard way because it was the right way, and she felt something crack open inside her. "No," she said. "I don't." Ethan nodded slowly. "Good. Because people like your father, they win a lot of battles, but they lose the things that matter." "Like what?" "Like trust. Like respect. Like knowing that what you built will last because it was built right." He picked up the toy truck he'd been carving and turned it over in his hands. "My son's going to grow up knowing I worked my ass off for him. That might be all I leave him, but it'll be real." Lena felt her throat tighten. She thought about her own father, about the empire he'd built on shortcuts and lies, about the legacy he was so desperate to protect, and she wondered if he'd ever once stopped to think about what he was actually leaving behind. "I don't want to be like him," she said quietly. "Then don't be." "It's not that simple." "Yeah, it is. You just decide, every day, every choice." Ethan set down the truck and met her eyes. "You think I don't screw up? That I always know the right thing to do? I make mistakes all the time. But I keep trying. That's all any of us can do." The wind rattled the tarp. Outside, the light was fading, the temperature already dropping. Lena pulled her knees to her chest and tried to hold on to the warmth of his words. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not giving up on me." Ethan's expression softened. "You made that easy." They settled into the makeshift shelter as darkness fell, zipping the sleeping bags together to create a single cocoon. It was awkward at first, the closeness, the awareness of another person's body heat and breath. But the cold didn't care about awkwardness, and eventually Lena stopped thinking about it and just focused on staying warm. "Ethan?" she said into the darkness. "Yeah? What happens if no one comes?" He was quiet for a long moment. "We keep going, one day at a time. That's all we can do." She wanted to believe him, wanted to think they could outlast this. But lying there in the dark, listening to the wind claw at the cabin walls, Lena felt fear settle over her like another layer of cold. Ethan's hand found hers in the darkness. "We're going to make it, you and me. We've come too far to quit now." His grip was steady, certain. Lena held on and tried to borrow some of that certainty for herself. The second storm hit 36 hours later. They'd spent the previous day rationing the last of their food and trying to repair the stove, but the crack in the flue was too severe. Ethan managed to patch it with scrap metal and furnace cement he'd found in his toolbox, but he wouldn't guarantee it would hold. "We light this. There's a chance it could fail," he said. "Smoke us out or worse. And if we don't light it, we freeze." Lena looked at the patched stove, at Ethan's makeshift repair job, and made the decision. "Light it." He didn't argue. Just built a small fire using the last of their dry kindling and watched the smoke carefully as it rose through the damaged flue. It held, barely. The heat it produced was pathetic compared to what they needed, but it was something. Then the wind picked up. Lena felt it first, a change in pressure that made her ears pop. She looked at Ethan and saw him already moving to the window, pulling back the tarp to peer outside. "No," he muttered. "Not again." She joined him at the window. The sky had turned that same bruised color, heavy and dark and promising violence. The wind was already building, throwing snow in spiraling gusts. "How long do we have?" she asked. "An hour. Maybe less." Yes. They moved fast, securing everything they could, filling containers with water, bringing in the last scraps of firewood. But Lena could see the calculations running behind Ethan's eyes, could see him adding up their supplies against the storm's duration and coming up short. "We're not going to make it through this one, are we?" she said. Ethan stopped, snow shovel in hand, and looked at her. "I don't know." The honesty of it hurt more than a lie would have. The storm hit like a fist. Within minutes, visibility dropped to nothing. The wind screamed, throwing itself against the cabin with enough force to make the walls shudder. The tarp Ethan had strung over the damaged roof tore loose with a sound like a gunshot, and snow poured through the gap. "Damn it!" Ethan grabbed rope and a ladder, climbing up to try to secure the tarp before they lost it completely. "It's too dangerous," Lena shouted over the wind. "We lose that tarp. We lose the cabin." But he was right. But watching him climb in the howling wind, watching the ladder shake with each gust, made her stomach turn. She held the base steady, useless against forces so much bigger than both of them, and prayed he wouldn't fall. He didn't. He lashed the tarp down with shaking hands, nearly got blown off twice, and finally climbed back down, face white with cold. "That won't hold long," he said, breathing hard. It didn't. 20 minutes later, the tarp tore again, and this time there was no fixing it. Snow poured through the gap in the roof, piling up faster than they could shovel it out. The temperature inside the cabin plummeted. The fire in the patch stove started smoking, the wind forcing exhaust back down the damaged flue. Ethan killed the fire. "We can't stay here. Truck, now." They grabbed what little they had left, blankets, the emergency pack, the last can of food, and fought their way through the snow to the truck. The door barely opened against the drifts. Ethan shoved Lena inside first, then climbed in after her, slamming the door against the storm. He turned the key. The engine groaned, turned over, died. "No, come on." He tried again, same result. "What's wrong?" "Battery's weak, cold's killing it." He pumped the gas pedal and tried a third time. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally caught. Ethan let out a breath. Okay, we're good." But they weren't good. Lena could see the fuel gauge hovering near empty, could see Ethan's hand shaking as he adjusted the heater, could feel the cold pressing against the thin metal shell of the truck cab like it was trying to crush them. "How much gas do we have?" she asked. "Maybe 4 hours. 5 if we're lucky." "And after that?" Ethan didn't answer. He just cranked the heater as high as it would go and stared out the windshield at the wall of white. They sat in silence, listening to the engine rattle and the wind howl. The windows frosted over despite the heater. Lena's fingers were already numb. She tucked them under her arms and tried to conserve heat. "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. "For what?" "For not getting you out of here before this happened. I should have tried harder, should have found a way. You kept me alive. That's more than anyone else could have done." "Yeah, but for how much longer?" His voice cracked. "I promised myself I'd finish this job, get back to Sam, give him the life he deserves, and now, don't." "Well," Lena reached across the cab and gripped his arm. "Don't do that. We're not dead yet." "We're close enough." "Oh, no, we're not. Because you taught me something, Ethan. You taught me that survival isn't about being strong or smart or having all the answers. It's about not giving up. It's about getting back up every time you get knocked down and fighting for one more day." Ethan looked at her, and she saw everything he'd been holding back. The fear, the exhaustion, the weight of responsibility he'd carried alone for so long. "I'm tired," he said. "I'm so damn tired." "Is it? I know, but you don't have to carry this alone anymore. We're in this together, and we're going to get through it together." She didn't know if she believed it, but she said it anyway. But she didn't because he needed to hear it, and because saying it out loud made it feel a little more possible. The heater kept running, the fuel gauge kept dropping, and outside the storm raged on.
Sugetsu ona CCT sasipas.
3 hours later, the engine died. Ethan had been watching the gauge, rationing the gas, turning the heater off for stretches to make it last. But physics didn't care about rationing. The fuel ran out, the engine coughed one last time, and silence rushed in like water filling a grave. "Okay," Ethan said. "Okay, new plan." What plan? He was already moving, unzipping the sleeping bags, layering them over both of them. "We share heat, stay close, keep our core temperature up." For how long? As long as it takes. Lena wanted to ask what happened when their body heat wasn't enough, when the cold finally won, but she didn't. She just huddled against Ethan, pulling the sleeping bags tight around them, and tried to stop shaking. The temperature inside the truck dropped fast without the engine. Their breath turned to fog, then ice on the windows. Lena's teeth chattered so hard her jaw ached. Beside her, Ethan wrapped his arms around her, trying to transfer whatever warmth he had left. "Talk to me," he said. "Stay awake." "About what?" "Anything. Just talk." So she did. She told him about growing up in her father's house, about the tutors and the boarding schools, and the summers spent in mansions that never felt like home. She told him about the first time she'd walked into a Hawthorne Industries board meeting, 22 years old and terrified, trying to prove she belonged. She told him about the loneliness of being Richard Hawthorne's daughter, of never knowing if people wanted her or just wanted access to her father's empire. And Ethan talked too, about growing up poor, about learning to fix things because they couldn't afford to replace them, about meeting his wife in a hardware store and knowing immediately she was the one, about holding Sam for the first time and feeling more terrified than he'd ever been in his life, about the accident that took Sam's mother, about the guilt that still ate at him because he hadn't been there, because he'd been working, always working, trying to build something better. They talked until their voices slurred with cold, until the words came slow and heavy. Lena's mind started to drift. She felt herself slipping, felt the cold wrapping around her like a blanket, and part of her wanted to let go. But Ethan's arms tightened around her. "Stay with me, Lena. Don't go to sleep." "I'm tired." "I know, but you gotta fight, just a little longer." "Why?" "Because I need you. Because we're not done yet. Because you promised me we'd get through this together." She'd said that, hadn't she? Lena tried to remember, tried to hold on to the thread of consciousness, but it was so hard. Everything was cold and dark and distant. "Lena." Ethan's voice was sharp now, cutting through the fog. "Look at me." She forced her eyes open. His face was inches from hers, pale, lips tinged blue, but his eyes were fierce. "You don't get to quit on me now," he said. "Not after everything. You hear me? We've come too far." "I'm not quitting," she mumbled. "Just resting." "No, you're fighting. We both are." He pulled her closer, wrapping the sleeping bags tighter, and Lena felt his heartbeat against her chest. Fast, erratic, but still going, still fighting. So she fought too. She forced herself to stay awake, to keep talking, to hold on to consciousness, even though every part of her body screamed to let go. She talked about the cabin, about the pump they'd fixed together, about the moment she'd realized she was stronger than she'd ever thought possible. And Ethan talked about Sam, about the toy truck he was carving, about the promise he'd made to be a better father than his own had been. Time became meaningless. There was only the cold and the darkness, and the two of them clinging to each other and to life. And then, through the howling of the wind, Lena heard something else. A sound, mechanical, distant but growing closer. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Ethan lifted his head, listening. His eyes widened. "Helicopter." But she... They scrambled to the truck doors, shoving them open against the snow. The sound was louder now, unmistakable. Through the whiteout, Lena saw lights, bright, sweeping, searching. Ethan grabbed a flashlight from the emergency pack and started signaling, waving it in wide arcs. "Here, we're here!" The helicopter banked, circling. The lights swept across the buried truck, and Lena saw the side door open. Figures in rescue gear appeared, rappelling down through the storm. The first rescuer reached them, shouting over the wind. "How many?" "2," Ethan shouted back. "Can you walk?" Barely! They were hauled up on lines, Lena first, then Ethan. The helicopter lifted as soon as they were aboard, banking hard and rising above the storm. Lena collapsed on the floor of the cabin, shaking uncontrollably. A medic wrapped her in thermal blankets and pressed a hot pack against her chest. Beside her, Ethan sat with his head in his hands, breathing hard. Another medic was checking him over, taking vitals, asking questions. "You're lucky," the medic said. "Another hour and we wouldn't have found you in time." Ethan looked at Lena, and their eyes met across the helicopter cabin. Lucky didn't begin to cover it. The helicopter flew them down the mountain, leaving the cabin and the storm and the wreckage behind. Lena watched through the window as the wilderness fell away, replaced by roads and towns and civilization. It should have felt like relief, like escape. But all she felt was loss. Because up on that mountain, stripped of everything she'd built her identity around, she'd discovered something real, something true. And she wasn't ready to let it go. The hospital smelled like bleach and recycled air. Lena woke in a private room with an IV in her arm and sunlight streaming through blinds that hurt her eyes. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memories flooded back. The storm, the truck, Ethan's arms around her in the darkness, the helicopter lights cutting through the whiteout. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "You're awake. Good. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." Lena's voice came out hoarse, her throat raw. "Where's Ethan? The man who came in with me?" "Room down the hall. He's fine. Mild frostbite, dehydration, exhaustion. Same as you. Doctor wants to keep you both for observation. I need to see him. Later. Right now, you need rest." Oh, but Lena was already pulling the IV from her arm, ignoring the nurse's protests. She swung her legs out of bed and the room tilted. She grabbed the bed frame, waited for the dizziness to pass, then started walking. The nurse followed her into the hallway, still arguing, but Lena ignored her. She moved from door to door, peering through windows, until she found him. Ethan sat on the edge of a hospital bed, staring at his bandaged hands like he didn't recognize them. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by clean walls and fluorescent lights. Lena pushed open the door. He looked up, and something in his face relaxed. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, you?" "Been better." She sat down beside him on the bed. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The silence felt different here, not comfortable like it had been in the cabin, but heavy with everything they'd left unsaid. "My father's here," Lena said finally. "I saw his security outside my room." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What are you going to tell him?" "I don't know. He's going to want you back. Back in the boardroom, back under his thumb." "I know. And you're going to go, Sam." It wasn't a question. Lena looked at him, at this man who'd kept her alive, who'd taught her what it meant to fight for something real, and felt something tear inside her chest. "I don't have a choice," she said. "Yeah, you do. You just don't want to make it." The words hit her like a slap. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the truth was he was right. She could walk away, could tell her father to go to hell, could choose the person she'd become on that mountain over the person she'd been before. But the weight of her father's empire, the expectations, the fear of losing everything she'd built her identity around, it was crushing. "It's not that simple," she said. "It never is." Ethan stood and walked to the window, staring out at the parking lot below. "I get it. You've got a life to go back to, responsibilities. I'm just a guy who fixes things." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make this about you not being good enough. That's not what this is." He turned to face her. "Then what is it?" Lena opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. What was it? Fear? Duty? The inability to imagine a version of herself that existed outside her father's world. Before she could answer, the door opened. Richard Hawthorne walked in like he owned the place, because in a sense, he probably did. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than most people made in a month. His eyes swept over Lena, cataloging the hospital gown, the bandages, the exhaustion written into every line of her body, and dismissed it all as irrelevant. "Lena," he said, "we're leaving." "I'm not cleared yet. I've spoken with the doctors. You're fine, and we have business to discuss." His gaze shifted to Ethan, cold and assessing. "Thank you for keeping my daughter alive, Mr. Cole. Your contract will be fulfilled despite the circumstances. The money will be in your account by end of business today. Ethan didn't respond, just stared at Richard with an expression Lena couldn't read. Dad, she said, can you give us a minute? No, we're leaving now. I said, give us a minute. Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition that something had shifted in his daughter. He looked between Lena and Ethan, and his mouth tightened. 5 minutes, he said. Then we're gone. He walked out, leaving the door open. Lena could see his security stationed in the hallway, waiting. Ethan turned back to the window. You should go. Ethan, I mean it. This is your life, your world. I don't fit into it, and you know it. Lena stood and crossed to him, forcing him to look at her. What if I don't want to fit into it anymore? Then you're lying to yourself. You're Richard Hawthorne's daughter. You've got billions of dollars and an empire to run. What are you going to do? Throw it all away to live in a cabin in the woods? Maybe I am. No, you're not. Because when you get back to that boardroom, when you're wearing your expensive suits and making decisions that affect thousands of people, you're going to realize that what happened up there was just survival, nothing more. His words cut deep because part of her feared he was right, that the person she'd become on the mountain was temporary, a side effect of extreme circumstances, and that she'd slip back into being Richard Hawthorne's daughter the moment she walked back into her old life. You don't know that, she said. Yeah, I do, because I've seen it before. People think they want something different, something real, until they remember how comfortable their old life was. That's not fair. Life's not fair. You taught me that. Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. So that's it? We just walk away? Pretend the last month didn't happen? Ethan's expression softened. I'm not pretending anything. What happened up there was real. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and you proved it every day. But this, he gestured to the hospital room, to the world beyond it. This isn't my world. I've got a son waiting for me, a life I put on hold, and you've got yours. What if I don't want my life anymore? Then change it, but don't do it for me. Do it for you. Oh, the 5 minutes were up. Richard appeared in the doorway, impatient. Lena, now. She looked at Ethan one last time, searching his face for any sign that he wanted her to stay, to fight, to choose him. But his expression was closed off, guarded, and she realized he'd already made his decision. So she made hers. Goodbye, Ethan, she said quietly. Goodbye, Lena. She walked past her father out of the room down the hallway toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Richard's footsteps, heard him giving orders to his security team, heard the machinery of her old life clicking back into place. And she didn't look back. The penthouse felt like a museum. Lena stood in the living room of her apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble, furniture that had been featured in design magazines, and felt absolutely nothing. It was beautiful, expensive, perfect, and it was empty. She'd been back for 3 days. 3 days of hot showers and soft beds and food that didn't come from a can. 3 days of physical comfort that did nothing to fill the hollowness growing inside her. Her father had summoned her to the office the morning after they'd returned. Lena had walked into the boardroom wearing a designer suit that felt like costume, sat in her assigned seat, and listened to Richard outline his expectations, as if the past month had never happened. The Stellar Development acquisition is moving forward, he'd said. I expect your full support this time. Lena had looked around the table at the other board members, men and women who'd spent decades learning to nod and smile and rubber stamp whatever Richard Hawthorne wanted. She'd looked at her father, at the empire he'd built on shortcuts and lies, and she'd felt the weight of Ethan's words pressing down on her. Then change it. But don't do it for me. Do it for you. No, she'd said. The room had gone silent. Richard's expression hadn't changed. Excuse me? Yes. I said no. I'm not supporting the acquisition. The financials are fraudulent, the assets are overvalued, and you know it. This isn't business. It's theft. You don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I do. I spent 2 weeks going through every document, every transaction. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the falsified appraisals. I know exactly what you're doing, and I'm not going to be part of it. Right, but Richard had stood slowly, and for the first time in her life, Lena had seen genuine anger break through his controlled facade. You're out of line. No, I'm finally seeing clearly. If you fight me on this, I will remove you from the board. Then remove me. She'd walked out before he could respond, and she hadn't been back since. Now, standing in her empty apartment, Lena pulled out her phone and scrolled through the files she'd compiled. Evidence of her father's fraud, documented in spreadsheets and emails and transaction records. Enough to bury him if she went public. Enough to destroy the empire he'd spent his life building. Her finger hovered over the send button. One click, and it would all be over. She'd be free of him, free of the expectations, free of the life she'd never chosen. But she'd also be alone. The thought stopped her. Because as much as she wanted to burn it all down, she didn't know what came after. Didn't know who she was without Hawthorne Industries, without her father's approval, without the identity she'd spent 30 years constructing. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Lena answered. Hello? It's me! Ethan's voice hit her like a physical blow. She sat down hard on the couch, hands shaking. How did you get this number? She asked. Your father's assistant. Took some convincing. He paused. I needed to know you were okay. I'm fine. You're lying. Lena closed her eyes. Yeah. Your father called me. Offered me double my contract price to say you had a breakdown on the mountain, that you were unstable, needed psychiatric help. Wanted me to testify to that effect if it came up. Her blood ran cold. What did you say? I told him to go to hell. But Lena, he's coming for you. Whatever you're planning, he knows, and he's not going to let you destroy what he built. I know. So what are you going to do? Lena looked at her phone, at the files containing her father's secrets, at the power to end him sitting in the palm of her hand. And she thought about everything Ethan had taught her on that mountain, about building things the right way, about choosing integrity over shortcuts, about being someone you could respect when you looked in the mirror. I'm going to take his empire, she said. Not destroy it, take it, and rebuild it into something worth keeping. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How, sick? The acquisition, stellar development. If I can prove the fraud before the deal closes, the board will have to act. They'll remove him to protect themselves. And someone has to fill the vacuum. And that someone is you. Yeah, that's a hell of a fight. I know. You sure you're ready for it? Lena thought about the pump they'd fixed together, about the roof they'd rebuilt, about the night in the truck when she'd been ready to give up and Ethan had refused to let her. She thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd learned, everything she'd become. No, she said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. She heard him laugh, a short, surprise sound. Good, because you're going to need help. What kind of help? The kind that knows how to build things right, how to see through bullshit, how to fight when the odds are against you. Lena's heart started pounding. Ethan, I'm not coming back to be your employee or your project. If I do this, we're partners. Equal stakes, equal say. My father will try to destroy you. Let him try. I've survived worse. You have a son. Yeah. And I want him to grow up knowing his dad stood for something. That he didn't just build things, he built them right. With someone who shares that vision. He paused. If you'll have me. Lena felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. When can you start? Already started. I've been going through those stellar development documents you sent me. I didn't send you. She stopped. My father's assistant. Smart woman. She doesn't like what he's doing any more than you do. And she's not the only one. You've got allies, Lena. People who've been waiting for someone to stand up to him. You just have to give them a reason. Lena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below her. Somewhere down there was her father's office, the boardroom where he held court, the empire he'd built on lies. And somewhere down there were people who were tired of lying, tired of cutting corners, tired of winning at any cost. I need you here, she said. In person. This won't work long distance. I know, I'm already packing. Sam's coming with me. You sure? He needs to see this. Needs to know that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing, and that you don't face it alone. Lena's chest felt tight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. No, but we're going to. She heard the smile in his voice. Yeah, we are. Mushkiak. Ethan arrived 4 days later. Lena met him at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Hawthorne Industries headquarters. He looked different in the city, out of place in his canvas jacket and work boots, like a wolf that had wandered into a petting zoo. But his eyes were the same, clear, focused, uncompromising. And beside him was Sam. The boy was small for 4, with Ethan's dark hair and eyes that took in everything with careful intensity. He held his father's hand and studied Lena with the kind of seriousness that made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. Sam, this is Lena, Ethan said. She's a friend. We're going to help her with some work. Sam nodded solemnly. Are you the lady from the mountain? Lena crouched down to his level. Yeah, I am. Daddy says you're really strong, Your daddy's the strong one. He saved my life. Sam considered this. He saves everybody. That's his job. Ethan's face went red. Sam, it's true. The boy looked up at his father with absolute faith. You fix things that are broken. That's what you do. Lena met Ethan's eyes over Sam's head, and something passed between them. Understanding, commitment, the shared knowledge that they were about to walk into a fight that could cost them everything. Come on, she said. I want to show you something. She led them to a building 2 blocks away, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and high ceilings. It was empty except for some old desks and filing cabinets left by the previous tenant. What is this? Ethan asked. Our office, if you want it. I signed the lease this morning. He walked through the space, Sam trailing behind him, and Lena watched him assess it the way he'd assessed the cabin, looking for potential, for what it could become with enough work. It needs a lot, he said. Everything worth having does. Ethan turned to face her. If we do this, we do it right. No shortcuts, no compromises. Agreed. And your father's going to come at us with everything he has. I know. We could lose. We could, but we could win. And if we win, we build something that lasts. Something built on integrity instead of lies. Ethan looked around the empty warehouse, at the blank canvas waiting for them to fill it. Sam was exploring the far corner, making engine noises as he pushed an imaginary truck across the concrete floor. Okay, Ethan said. Let's get to work. They spent the next week preparing. Lena compiled evidence while Ethan built relationships with mid-level employees at Hawthorne Industries, people who'd been keeping their heads down, waiting for someone to stand up to Richard. They found allies in unexpected places. The assistant who'd passed information, a VP who'd been documenting irregularities for years, even a few board members who were tired of rubber-stamping fraud. But Richard wasn't idle. Lena's access to company systems was revoked. Her corporate credit cards were canceled. Security was told not to let her in the building. Her father was cutting her off, isolating her, making it clear that if she wanted to fight him, she'd be doing it alone. Except she wasn't alone. Ethan showed up every morning with Sam in tow, and they worked side by side, building their case document by document. The boy did homework at a makeshift desk while his father and Lena mapped out strategy, and sometimes Lena would look up and see Sam watching them with those serious eyes, and she'd remember why they were doing this. Not just for themselves, for him. For every kid who deserved to grow up in a world where doing the right thing mattered more than winning. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday. Lena had 72 hours to make her case, to convince people who'd spent decades following Richard Hawthorne's orders that it was time to stop. On Wednesday night, she and Ethan sat in the empty warehouse, surrounded by documents and cold coffee and the weight of everything riding on the next day. You ready? He asked. No. Good. The moment you think you're ready is the moment you get sloppy. Boy, I'll be good to see. Lena smiled despite the fear churning in her stomach. You always this encouraging? Always. He set down his coffee and looked at her. Listen, whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won. How do you figure? Because you chose to fight. You could have walked away, gone back to being your father's daughter, made your life easy. But you didn't. You chose the hard way. And that matters. Even if we lose? Mom Basquez. Even if we lose, because you'll know you tried, and that's worth more than any empire. Lena reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were still scarred from the mountain, still rough from years of hard work. They were the hands of someone who built things that lasted. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in me." "I didn't believe in you. I just saw what was already there." They sat like that for a while, hands clasped across the table, and Lena felt something settle inside her. Not peace, exactly, but certainty. Whatever happened tomorrow, she was ready to face it. With Ethan beside her, she could face anything. The boardroom felt colder than the mountain had ever been. Lena stood outside the double doors, briefcase in hand, and forced herself to breathe. Through the frosted glass, she could see shapes moving, board members taking their seats, her father at the head of the table like always, security positioned at each corner. This was his domain, his kingdom, and she was about to walk in and try to take it from him. Ethan stood beside her, wearing the only suit he owned. It didn't fit quite right, the shoulders a little tight, but he wore it the same way he wore everything else, with quiet confidence that had nothing to do with appearances. "You've got this," he said. "He's going to destroy me. Only if you let him." Lena looked at him, at this man who'd taught her that survival meant getting back up every time you got knocked down, and she nodded. Then she pushed open the doors and walked into the room. Every head turned. Conversations died. Richard sat at the far end of the table, expression unreadable, flanked by his lawyers and the board members who'd spent decades following his lead. But scattered among them were the others, the allies Lena and Ethan had quietly recruited over the past week. People who were tired of looking the other way. "Lena," Richard said, voice cold, "you're not authorized to be here." "Quasi. Detimas." "Actually, I am. As a board member with a 5% stake, I have the right to call an emergency meeting, which is what I'm doing." "On what grounds?" "Fraud, misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty." She set her briefcase on the table and pulled out a thick folder. "The Stellar Development acquisition is built on falsified documents, shell companies, and assets that don't exist. And you know it." A murmur ran through the room. Richard's expression didn't change, but Lena saw his jaw tighten. "Those are serious accusations," one of the board members said. "Marcus Chen, old guard, Richard's ally for 20 years. Do you have proof?" "I do." Lena opened the folder and began distributing copies. Transaction records showing money flowing through offshore accounts, appraisals that were falsified, contracts for projects that were never built. It's all here. She watched them read, watched the reality sink in. Some of them had suspected, some had known, and chosen to ignore it. But seeing it laid out in black and white, documented and undeniable, forced them to confront what they'd been part of. Richard stood slowly. "This is a witch hunt. My daughter had a traumatic experience." "Don't!" Lena's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Don't you dare use what happened on that mountain to discredit me. I survived because I learned what it means to build something real, something that lasts. And this," she gestured at the documents, "this is the opposite of that. You're emotional, unstable. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I spent 2 weeks going through every transaction, every shell company, every falsified record. And I'm not the only one." She looked at Ethan, who stepped forward and set down his own folder. "I'm a contractor," Ethan said. "I've spent 15 years in construction. I know what projects cost, what materials cost, what labor costs. And these numbers," he tapped the Stellar Development documents, "they don't add up. Buildings that supposedly cost 30 million were built for 10. The difference went into offshore accounts, and that's just one project out of dozens." Richard's lawyer stood. "Mr. Cole has no standing here. He's not a board member, not a shareholder. He's a consultant I hired," Lena interrupted, "to verify the technical accuracy of these documents, which he has. Every discrepancy is documented. Every falsified record is proven. You can dismiss me all you want, but you can't dismiss the evidence." The room fell silent. Board members exchanged glances. Some of them were calculating. Lena could see it, weighing loyalty to Richard against their own liability, their own exposure if this went public. Richard's face had gone red. "You ungrateful—" "Careful," Lena said quietly. "We're on the record now." He stared at her, and for the first time in her life, Lena saw something in her father's eyes that looked like fear. Not of her, but of losing control, of watching the empire he'd built start to crumble. "I want to vote," Lena said, turning to address the full board, "on whether to proceed with the Stellar Development acquisition, given the evidence of fraud. And I want it now." Marcus Chen cleared his throat. "We need time to review." "No, we don't. The closing is scheduled for tomorrow. If we don't act now, Hawthorne Industries becomes complicit in fraud. And when it comes out, and it will come out, every person in this room is liable." That got their attention. Lena saw the shift, saw them stop thinking about loyalty and start thinking about survival. Richard saw it too. "If you vote against this acquisition," he said, voice tight, "you're voting against me, against everything I've built. I will remember that." "Good," Lena said. "Remember it. And then ask yourself if your empire was worth building on lies." The vote was called. Hands went up slowly, reluctantly, but they went up. One by one, board members chose survival over loyalty, chose accountability over shortcuts. When the count was finished, the acquisition was dead. 7 votes to 5. Richard sat down hard, face pale. He looked at Lena like he didn't recognize her. "This isn't over," he said. "You're right. It's not." Lena pulled out another folder. "Because now we need to talk about who's going to run this company moving forward. And given your involvement in the fraud, documented, provable involvement, it can't be you." The room erupted. Richard's lawyers were on their feet, shouting about due process and defamation. Board members were arguing, some defending Richard, others trying to distance themselves. Lena stood in the center of it all, calm and steady, and waited for them to exhaust themselves. Finally, Marcus Chen held up a hand. "Enough. Lena, what are you proposing?" Richard steps down as CEO, effective immediately. The board appoints an interim leadership team to conduct a full audit. Anyone found complicit in the fraud is removed. And we rebuild this company from the ground up. No shortcuts, no lies, no cutting corners. We do it right, or we don't do it at all. "And who leads this interim team?" Marcus asked. "You, Ma?" "No, I don't want to run Hawthorne Industries." She saw surprise flicker across the faces around the table. "I want to run a division, a new division focused on sustainable development, real projects, built right, with transparency and accountability at every level. Give me the resources and the autonomy, and I'll prove it can work. That integrity and profit aren't mutually exclusive." Richard laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think you can do better than me? You're 30 years old. You know nothing about running a company." "You're right. I don't know everything, but I know how to build things that last, and I know how to work with people who share that vision." She looked at Ethan. "People who choose the hard way because it's the right way." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. He was old guard, conservative, the kind of man who'd spent his career avoiding risk. But he was also pragmatic. And right now, pragmatism meant cutting losses. "I'll support it," he said, "on one condition. You bring in outside oversight. Third-party auditors, independent board members. Prove to us that this new division can operate cleanly. Do that, and I'll back your expansion." Other heads nodded around the table. The tide was turning, slowly but unmistakably. Richard saw it too, saw his control slipping away. And for a moment, Lena thought he might fight, might rage and threaten and try to burn it all down rather than let her win. But he didn't. He just stood, straightened his tie, and walked toward the door. He stopped beside Lena, close enough that only she could hear him. "I taught you everything you know," he said quietly, "and this is how you repay me." "You taught me how to win at any cost," Lena replied. "Ethan taught me that some costs are too high." Richard's face twisted. Then he walked out, and the door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the room. The transition took months. Richard didn't go quietly. He fought the board's decision, hired lawyers, threatened lawsuits. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his allies were abandoning him one by one, protecting themselves from the fallout. Eventually, he accepted a settlement, a golden parachute that let him walk away with his wealth intact, but his reputation in ruins. Lena didn't celebrate. There was too much work to do. She and Ethan spent the next 6 months building their new division from scratch. They hired people who'd been passed over by the old guard, engineers who cared about quality, project managers who refused to cut corners, architects who designed for longevity instead of profit margins. They took on their first project, a mixed-use development in a struggling neighborhood, built with sustainable materials and fair labor practices. It was slow, it was expensive, and it was worth it. Lena learned to let go of needing to control everything, to trust the people around her. Ethan learned that his voice mattered, that his experience and integrity were assets more valuable than any degree. And Sam learned that work could be something you were proud of, something that made the world a little better instead of just making you rich. The project finished on schedule and under budget. It wasn't a miracle. It was just what happened when people built things right. The success attracted attention. Other companies started asking how they'd done it. Investors who were tired of chasing quarterly returns at the expense of everything else started reaching out. Within a year, Lena's division was profitable. Within 2, it was outperforming the rest of Hawthorne Industries. The board took notice. They offered her the CEO position. She turned it down. "I don't want to run the whole company," she told Marcus over coffee in the warehouse-turned-office that had become her base of operations. "I want to keep building, keep proving that there's another way. And if we need leadership at the top, someone who can transform the entire company the way you've transformed this division?" Lena smiled. "Then find someone who shares the vision, but make sure they've gotten their hands dirty. Make sure they know what it costs to build something real." Marcus nodded slowly. "You've changed." "Yeah, I have." She had. The woman who'd been dumped on that mountain, arrogant, isolated, desperate for her father's approval, was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that strength wasn't about control or perfection. It was about endurance, about getting back up, about choosing the hard way because the easy way left you empty. That evening, Lena stood in the warehouse watching Ethan review blueprints for their next project. Sam sat at his desk nearby, working on homework with the kind of focused intensity that reminded her of his father. The space around them was alive with activity. Engineers debating designs, project managers scheduling deliveries, people building something that mattered. Ethan looked up and caught her watching. "What?" "Just thinking." "About?" "About how different my life is now, how different I am." He set down the blueprints and walked over to her. "Regret it?" "Not for a second." "Even though you gave up running an empire?" "I didn't give up anything. I just stopped chasing something that was never going to make me happy." She gestured at the warehouse, at the people working around them. "This is what I want, building things that last, with people who care about doing it right." Ethan smiled. "Yeah, me too." Sam looked up from his homework. "Dad, is Lena going to stay with us?" Ethan glanced at Lena, something unspoken passing between them. They'd been careful, professional, keeping their relationship focused on work because neither of them wanted to complicate what they'd built. But standing there in the warehouse, surrounded by the life they'd created together, Lena realized she was tired of being careful. "Yeah, buddy," Ethan said, still looking at Lena. "I think she is." Sam nodded, satisfied, and went back to his homework. And Lena felt something settle inside her that had been restless for as long as she could remember. A sense of belonging, of purpose, of home. 2 years after the board meeting, Lena and Ethan stood on a muddy construction site watching their latest project take shape. It was a housing development designed for working families, affordable, sustainable, built to last 100 years instead of 20. The foundation was poured, the framing was going up, and every nail, every board, every detail was exactly what it should be. "You ever think about the cabin?" Lena asked. "Every day," Ethan said. "Sometimes I can't believe we made it out. Sometimes I can't believe I wanted to." He looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, that mountain stripped away everything I thought made me who I was. My name, my money, my father's approval. And I hated it at first. Thought I was being punished. But what I was really being given was a chance to figure out who I was without all of that." "And who are you?" Lena smiled. "I'm still figuring it out. But I know I'm not Richard Hawthorne's daughter anymore. I'm just me. someone who builds things, someone who shows up and does the work and tries to leave things better than she found them. That's not a small thing. No, it's everything. Esata spam. They stood in silence for a while, watching the workers move across the site with purpose and precision. Sam was there too, wearing a hard hat that was too big for him, following one of the foremen around and asking questions about everything. He was going to be like his father, Lena thought, the kind of person who built things instead of tearing them down. I've been thinking, Ethan said, about expanding, opening an office on the West Coast, taking on bigger projects. You sure you're ready for that? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He glanced at her. I learned that from someone. Lena laughed. We're both crazy. Yeah, but we're crazy together. That night, they had dinner at the small house Ethan had bought in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom with a yard where Sam could play. Lena had been spending more nights there than at her penthouse, and at some point, it had stopped feeling like visiting and started feeling like coming home. After Sam went to bed, she and Ethan sat on the back porch, watching fireflies drift through the darkness. I got a call from my father yesterday, Lena said. Ethan stiffened. What did he want? To tell me he's starting a new venture, something in real estate development. He wanted to know if I'd be interested in partnering. What did you tell him? I told him no, that I'd built something I was proud of, and I wasn't interested in compromising it. Not for him, not for anyone. How'd he take it? About as well as you'd expect. Said I was throwing away my potential, that I'd regret choosing integrity over ambition. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Do you regret it? Lena looked at the house behind them, at the light still glowing in Sam's window, at the life she'd built from the wreckage of her old one. She thought about the mountain, about the storm, about the moment she'd decided to fight instead of quit. And she thought about everything that had come after, the hard work, the small victories, the slow transformation from someone who'd inherited an empire into someone who'd built something real. No, she said, I don't regret anything. Because here was the truth that Lena had learned in the cold and the dark and the desperate fight for survival. You could inherit a lot of things. Wealth, power, a name that opened doors, but you couldn't inherit integrity. You couldn't inherit purpose. Those were things you had to build yourself, one choice at a time, one day at a time, even when it was hard and the outcome was uncertain. Her father had taught her to win at any cost, but the cost had been too high. Relationships, respect, the ability to look at herself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Ethan had taught her something different, that the point wasn't just to survive, but to survive as someone you could be proud of. That shortcuts might get you there faster, but they left you empty. That the hard way, the right way, was the only way that mattered in the end. And Sam was learning it too. Watching his father show up every day. Watching Lena choose the difficult path because it was the honest one. Learning that work wasn't just about making money, it was about making something that lasted, something that mattered, something you could point to and say, I built that, and I built it right. The fireflies danced in the darkness, brief and beautiful, and gone too soon. But while they burned bright. Ethan reached over and took her hand. What are you thinking about? About how grateful I am. For the mountain, for the storm, for everything that broke me down so I could build myself back up. You did that yourself. No, we did it together. And that was the other truth she'd learned. You didn't have to do it alone. In fact, you couldn't. Real strength wasn't about independence or control. It was about finding people who shared your values, who showed up when things got hard, who built alongside you instead of tearing you down. Ethan squeezed her hand. Come on, it's late. They went inside together, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom they now shared. Through the wall, they could hear Sam's soft breathing, steady and peaceful. Lena lay in the darkness, Ethan's arm around her, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not the shallow happiness that came from winning or acquiring or impressing people who didn't matter, but the deep bone-level satisfaction of knowing she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She'd lost an empire, but she'd gained something far more valuable. A life built on truth instead of lies, on partnership instead of domination, on work that made the world a little better instead of just making her rich. And in the morning, she'd wake up and do it again. Show up at the construction site, review the plans, make the hard calls, build something that would outlast her, something that would stand as proof that integrity and success weren't enemies, they were partners. if you had the courage to do the work. Because that was the real lesson the mountain had taught her. Not how to survive, but how to live. Not how to win, but how to build something worth winning. And that made all the difference. Outside, the fireflies had gone dark, but the stars were still burning, ancient and patient, witnesses to every human struggle and triumph. They'd seen empires rise and fall, seen people chase power and lose everything that mattered, seen others choose the harder path and discover that it led somewhere worth going. The stars didn't judge. They just watched and waited and burned steady in the darkness, showing the way home for anyone brave enough to look up. Lena closed her eyes and let sleep take her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities to prove that doing things right was always worth it. But tonight, she rested, knowing she'd earned it, knowing she'd built something real, knowing that the woman who'd been abandoned on a frozen mountain had died in that storm, and someone stronger had been born in her place. Someone who understood that the greatest legacy you could leave wasn't wealth or power or your name on a building. It was the example you set, the lives you touched, the proof that another way was possible, and that legacy, built one honest choice at a time, would outlast any empire.